to the edition of ImpactED, a joint program of VEDP and VEDA. I am Jim Noel, your VEDA president during the time of COVID-19. We have a great lineup today of speakers for you. And let me just walk through the speakers quickly before we get started with our first presentation. Leading off today is Barry Duvall, the Virginia Chamber of Commerce. He'll give us an update of getting Virginians back to work, Blueprint Virginia. Following Barry, we're going to have a little brief, announcement or request for assistance from Matthew James, former VEDA Legislator of the Year, and now with the Department of General Services, a message about a diversity study that's being undertaken by the state. Matthew will be followed by, our own Stephen Murray with VEDP with his economic impact update, and understand presentation will kind of mesh nicely with what Barry's presenting here today with some of the more statistical details. And then at the very end, Matt Weaver from the Department of Housing and Community Development with some information about access to funding through the Community Development Block Grant Program to assist communities with business recovery. We're going to follow the same format we had before. Our speakers will take questions. I think they prefer to do that at the conclusion of their comments. Please use the chat feature at the bottom. Please stay muted. I know you've heard that a million times. Please do it again. And just want to announce we will be having another session, the next one of these on June 15th. And our VEDA view will be on the digital meeting. So please, you'll be able to register for that. I think Connie said today. Okay. So we look forward to that. We have some great speakers and some interesting, topics to cover during the summer membership meeting. So without any further ado, it is my pleasure to have ex officio member of the board of VEDA and leader of the state chamber, Barry Duvall. Barry, thanks for being here today.
Yes, Jim, thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of this distinguished agenda. I'm always pleased to be with my friends in economic development across the Commonwealth of Virginia. And I want to thank you, Jim, and the board members for your leadership, especially during this time. And I know you jested about having the opportunity to lead during a pandemic, but really can't think of anyone better and more suited and who knows Virginia any better. And thank you and the board members for your leadership. I won't be able to stay, as Stephen and I have done a few of these around the Commonwealth. He will provide a lot of great insight as to how the Commonwealth is faring, and he will demonstrate the importance of our ability to come back as it relates to our performance as a state. And I'm sorry I'm going to miss Matthew, but I will say Matthew, when he was the delegate, James, received outstanding awards from the Virginia Chamber for his pro-business votes as well. I'm going to go through this PowerPoint pretty quickly and do it in less than 8 minutes. And then, Connie, whatever format you want to have questions in, if you want to read the questions or Jim, that would be fine as well. And then I'll be off here within 15 to 20 minutes. But let me just start by reminding some of your viewers next, Connie, on who the Virginia Chamber is and our membership structure. It's our vision to be the voice of Virginia business, often quoted throughout the Commonwealth of Virginia over 2,000 times last year in the media, and to be an influential advocacy organization. So we endorse ideas. The next slide will tell you that our mission is to be a nonpartisan business advocacy organization. So we don't endorse candidates, we do endorse ideas, and we do advocate for those ideas during the General Assembly. So we're very committed to seeing Virginia have the best business climate possible so that the economic developers in the state have the best product to sell. And I always feel like if we do our job well at the Virginia Chamber and we advocate for the best business climate, then it'll help those of you in economic development do your job, because you'll have an even better product to market to the outside world. So I see the Chamber and the Economic Developers Association as a partnership to advance the economic health of the Commonwealth, to help grow jobs and create more prosperity. And we appreciate that partnership with all of you. Next. Our membership continues to grow. I think if you click it one more time, you'll see every dot that pops up represents about 25 members. We're the largest business organization in the world. We in the Commonwealth, we have the largest membership organization in the Commonwealth, and we have about 85% of all the local chambers businesses that have 10 or fewer employees as members. So we're not just large business. In fact, 95% of our membership is small business that has less than 10 members. But we have been able to advocate effectively with members of the General Assembly for pro-business policies. Next. Some of you know these numbers in your own district. Next slide will show a little bit about the numbers around the Commonwealth. And this is as of this morning. Probably most importantly is for you to look at the shaded areas. The darker shaded areas obviously are where the cases are higher. Total cases are over 50,000, and the deaths are approaching 1,500. In our Commonwealth of a little more than 8 million people. And again, you'll see the concentration in Northern Virginia, concentration on the Eastern Shore, and then the concentration, obviously, in the Shenandoah Valley. The Eastern Shore and Shenandoah Valley are primarily a result, we think, of these close contacts among agricultural workers. Obviously, Northern Virginia is one of the most densely populated areas, and you'll see some other darker shades where the areas are densely populated as well. So this is just a visual to help you see where the cases are in the Commonwealth of Virginia. And clearly, it has a regional impact. And every life is precious. We hate to lose any Virginian to this pandemic, but we do see there are different intensities depending upon which part of the Commonwealth you're in. Next slide. Just some of the macro numbers that we get from our partners at the U.S. Chamber, and I thought you might find the macro numbers of interest in terms of economic growth. We have been moving quite well as a country in our national economic growth. The first quarter projection, though, pretty significant loss. This won't surprise anybody on this call. Next slide. And we thought we'd show you the estimates of some of the larger financial institutions regarding their economic outlook. And you'll see most of the financial banks there that you recognize, but the average projection for the second quarter contraction is about a third, about minus 33%. One surprise, and I'd love for someone to ask Stephen this question when I'm gone, and that is the jobs report numbers last Thursday and Friday, I think it was, surprised almost every economist that I've seen and read over the weekend. So I don't know if it's a data anomaly or we really did have that sort of jobs report come out and it's going to be reliable. But again, these are only estimates, and I don't know how clear anyone's crystal ball is, but I thought you might find this interesting for the next quarter. Sort of breaking down the impact of the unemployment, and Stephen may do this as well. He has a great slide that shows this. Obviously, the services and retail and food and travel are most heavily hit. Next slide. We know this from being close to the stream of commerce, each of us. I won't go through all of these executive orders, but May 15th, except for Nova and the rest, and Accomack, started the social gatherings of no more than 10 people, retail establishments allowed to operate 50% occupancy, offer outdoor dining up 50% occupancy, and some of these others on here. The next slide, we'll talk a little bit about the face covering. I won't go through these. I think you all know about the requirements for face covering. The chamber put out a statement saying we really didn't think this was an appropriate burden to place on business owners in terms of having to make the enforcement. But the face covering order is for the establishments themselves, and they do have the burden of enforcing this as of now. Next slide. Obviously now June 5th, again, except for Northern Virginia and the city of Richmond. Gatherings of up to 50 individuals. Restaurants are offering some indoor seating at about 50% capacity, some limited recreational activities, and now the public beaches are open, which is really going to be a godsend for our Southeast Virginia communities. Next slide. When this all started, we launched a COVID-19 resource center. I will tell you that those of you who are economic developers, I know you've done the same, and I've looked at some of your websites and some of your individual communities. You've done a great job with this. We had over 13,000 unique visitors to this site in the first 14 days. So this site was a real resource and has been a resource for businesses all across Virginia, not only listing the Commonwealth and Department of Health, but listing all the federal resources that are available for businesses. And we just really thought it was our job to provide local chambers with access and a platform for them to land on as well, and for all those members as well. So we're happy to help provide this as a resource, and it's being used by businesses across the Commonwealth. Next slide. We send out and have had over 40,000 people a week, unique emails, receive a message from me about the latest developments in COVID-19 and about the resource center and whatever the latest news about the day and the pandemic has been. Again, communicating and staying connected and keeping businesses informed. Next slide. I'll close with this. You may have read about this. We announced April 28th, the fact that Virginia really needs a blueprint for getting back to work. This is an important step that we've taken in concert with local chambers across the Commonwealth. And this blueprint is intended to be a guide for businesses as they open back up. Next slide. Someone asked me recently about the blueprint of 2025, and is this different? Hopefully, for those of you who are in economic development around the state, you know that we presented Blueprint Virginia 2025 to the incoming governor, Ralph Northam, 2 weeks after he was elected in 2017. And then you've read since April 28th about our short-term guidance document, which is actually coming out this week, called Blueprint Getting Virginians Back to Work. What I am going to say to you today, Jim, and I haven't announced this publicly, but I thought this might be a good place to do so, is that this fall we're going to announce Blueprint Virginia 2030, which will take about a year to develop. We would, in the past and in the future, next year, we'd like to partner, Connie, with VEDA in terms of facilitating public meetings around the state. As you all may remember, in 2013 and in 2017, we went through the same process. And we look at all industries and all regions and try to make sure we're representing the best public policies possible that the incoming governor and his administration or her administration may have after the election in 2021. So we will kick this off later this year, and we welcome you all to be a participating host in Blueprint Virginia 2030. Next slide. In terms of the outline of what we're going to release in a couple of days, obviously we'll talk about the process we use with over 1,000 businesses providing us their response. We'll summarize some of the key findings of how it's impacted business in Virginia. And then we're going to provide some very specific guidance for businesses in terms of restrictions and operations and best practices. And then we'll provide this for specific industries. All this information is going to come from tested sources that in fact have provided their industry with guidance. And we will provide this to you, Connie, and to your team, and just share with your members as they like, and especially those of you who represent business development in your region. You may want to have this as a resource on your webpage. It'll provide some guidance based on best practices. The other thing this is going to do, which is going to be new, is we're going to provide some recommendations for federal, state, and local assistance for policymakers. We think it's important that policymakers hear from the business community about what's important, what are some of the policies that can help them through this pandemic. And I'll just say this as an observation. Some of the news early this morning from around the world indicated that those countries that are rebounding best from the pandemic are those countries that have the most robust economy. So it's interesting how economic health is tied to the health of their citizens as they rebound. So if you look at Germany and if you look at Israel, those economies are doing well, and those countries are rebounding well in the rebound phase from the pandemic. So we want to have a strong economy in Virginia. You all are sharing that mutual goal, and that's why we want to make sure we are as robust as possible. Next slide. Just let you know, when we announced this, there was a lot of news coverage around the state. That's why I mentioned you may have seen it, and turning and getting Virginia back to work. The next slide. We had many of you send this out to your members. I want to thank you and local chambers for your support of this. Again, your members, your businesses sent in those survey results. We've gotten tremendous response from across the state of best practices by industry, best practices by businesses. And again, that is being compiled and released on Wednesday, I believe is our target date. Thank you for your support. And next slide, Connie. So the final plan will come out, we believe, Wednesday. We'll send it to you all, and we hope that we will be able to work with you to implement this plan for getting Virginia back to work using best practices and guidelines across the Commonwealth. And next slide. Look forward to you all partnering with us in Blueprint Virginia 2030. And Jim, I hope that you all will be a participating host, and as we go around the state, invite you all to have public hearings with us as you've done before. We'll be glad to be part of your project as well. And we might, and we look forward to partnering with you on that. And I think that is my last slide, Connie. Yes, good. I've almost memorized these presentations, Jim. I don't know if there are any chat or any questions or any comments about the Blueprint process. I'll certainly pause, and I'll allow you, Jim, and others to make any comments or ask me any questions that I can try to address.
Well, Barry, let me just say thank you. Appreciate you taking the time this morning, and you can certainly count on VEDA as being a partner as you do your work for Blueprint 2030. We would very much like to be a part of that. And I think we can provide you some valuable information for that planning process. We've got 154 people on the call. Somebody's got to have a question. Can't let you get away scot-free here.
I'm okay if I don't have a question. I won't take it as a lack of interest.
Well, we certainly appreciate your work and on getting this recovery plan out quickly. Certainly needed, and we can use all the direction we can get right now, everybody in the Commonwealth.
I think the key for every business inherently is that prior to COVID-19 and this pandemic, our businesses in Virginia were competing on service, on price, on efficiency and effectiveness. Their connectivity to the outside world, their quality of their workforce. I mean, these were key competitive issues. I think now we're actually going to see another component for competitiveness for businesses, and that is how safe are their customers, how safe is their workforce. I think it's going to be one of those dynamics where it will add to consumers' confidence if they think going to that business is a place they can be safe. It'll add to workforce confidence if they think they can go to work and be safe. So for me, it's a new paradigm of competitiveness for Virginia. And one of the things that we ought to be thinking about as an economic development community is how do we prepare for the next pandemic? How do we prepare our businesses and our healthcare community so we never go back into this sort of government forced shutdown that is so negatively impacting our economy. As I said in an op-ed in the Richmond Times recently, which we can send you to post on a wall 2 weekends ago, that the obvious approach would be to solve the healthcare crisis and then solve the economic crisis by reopening. But we know that the process of creating a vaccine and distributing it is taking far too long for us to keep the economy shut down. So, Jim, the idea of opening and working in public safety and worker safety is going to increase consumer confidence. That's what's going to distinguish businesses one from the other to remain competitive. I want Virginia to be known as a safe place to work, and I want Virginia to be known as a place that is the best place to expand your business and protects workers and protects customers. So with that, I'll leave you, and thank you for inviting me to be a part of your program today. I know you have great informed speakers coming up behind me. Stay safe, everybody.
Barry, thank you. And I think your words regarding safety as becoming an economic development issue is absolutely accurate. We'll give you a shout out. Stephen commented on the chat line, the Virginia Chamber has been a consistent champion for economic development for years. Thank you, Barry and team. Much appreciated.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Okay, Connie, is Matthew on board? Matthew James? You're muted.
I know. I can only do one thing at a time. I don't know. I don't see his name, but he could be on the phone. Matthew, are you out there? He may not have been able to get on for whatever reason. I can just say a few words about what he wanted to share.
You want to go to Stephen, and then if Matthew gets on, we come back to him?
Absolutely.
Great. Well, Stephen, thank you for being here once again. Great to have you on the session, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. Great to be with all of you again. Hope folks have gotten a little bit of time off, at least since the last time we were together. I just have a few quick updates, and then as always, welcome any comments or questions from our partners. In case you haven't heard, I don't think I had mentioned this before on the VEDA call, but we are back in the announcements business. I was speaking to Secretary Ball and Governor Northam earlier today. The governor has said he wants to make sure that the message gets out wide and clear across the country that Virginia is open for business. We're ready to start ramping back up again, and the governor is ready not just to make press releases on projects, but also to personally go and announce some of the projects in person. So I thought that was really encouraging. He also asked me to pass on his thanks for everything that VEDA is doing and for our whole economic development community. So I wanted to make sure and share that with all of you. Let's see, I have a few slides I'd like to share. Let's see if I can put this up. Sorry, I'm a little slow. There we go. Oop. Great. Jim, can you see that okay?
Yes, sir, I can.
Okay, great. So I'm going to share some of these a few slides for the first time as we start to, we've done a lot of work, obviously, on the economic impact of COVID-19, our various industries, regions, and so forth. And I would just say at a high level, without going back through all that information, things are continuing to trend within the range that we had previously shared with you all. I was going to share there just a couple slides looking at the trends with unemployment claims. So again, if you haven't been on one of these calls before, this dark blue line here is the weekly unemployment claims, the actual weekly claims coming in. Obviously, the huge spike after all the social distancing requirements peaked over 100,000 per week, and it's continued every week. Basically, we've continued to see those go down. So that is encouraging. We are continuing to see more claims come in, but obviously the number per week is going down quite sharply. We're getting into a much more manageable range there. And then, of course, the cumulative claims are continuing to grow well within that range that we previously had talked about before. So overall, this is the picture roughly that we anticipated, and is a picture that is getting better. Looking at it more like sort of this trend over time, so you've got the cumulative weekly claims, I showed you that, but you've also got continued claims because some people are coming back off, and so that sort of does relate to some of the BLS numbers that recently came out suggesting there was at least some job growth in the latest available month, which was encouraging. We're hoping that that will continue. So with that, I want to share some new information that I think almost none of you have seen. At least we might have been on a call with one or two folks last week. But as we start to look at the future, now think of this as this is not VEDP's forecast. These are third-party forecasts that we're just showing you on a plot here, but we were able to find, there's obviously lots of national forecasts, but there were two groups we were able to find that actually did forecasts for Virginia specifically. IHS Market, which the state utilizes, the Commonwealth utilizes to support its revenue forecasting, and Moody's, which is a source that we use very commonly at VEDP. So this is specifically payroll employment, so it would not include, I think, self-employed. It'd be non-farm employment, but still represents the vast majority of employment in the Commonwealth of Virginia. You can see the big drop, of course, that we're all aware of in Q2. What you'll notice is these are two very different. The overall shape, let's say over a few years, is similar, but Moody's is actually anticipating, in the latest numbers we had, that roughly half of the jobs that we temporarily lost would be back in place by the end of the current calendar year. So needless to say, we are rooting for the Moody's forecast and hope that they're very much right. IHS Markit actually expect things to get somewhat worse between now and the end of the calendar year and then start to rebound. But in both cases, there's an expectation of some relatively quick recovery, but then a long period going well into 2023, mid to late 2023, before we get back to 100%. So one of the things that we've been giving a lot of thought to is what are the range of things that VEDP and Virginia as a whole could do to try to make that tail as short as possible. You know, whatever uplift we get by the end of the calendar year, there's going to be some amount of elevated unemployment that likely continues for some period of time. Obviously, the sooner we can close that gap, the better. And I'm going to share a couple ideas on that momentarily. I did want to briefly also talk about how this particular recession, I guess not yet officially a recession, but it's going to be, I think, how it compares to the Great Recession. Obviously, much deeper, much faster. On the other hand, if you take the average of those two forecasts, the expectation is that we would get back to full strength sooner than later. I've not researched the history at a great level of depth, but I did see a number of stories over the last few days that looked at previous sort of government-imposed recessions, if you will, times when policy changes that had to be made caused a downturn in the economy. And some of the history suggests that in that kind of environment, where there really wasn't anything particularly wrong with the U.S. or Virginia economy prior to the pandemic, there's some evidence in the past that in those situations, once those policies are shifted back, that recovery actually happens in a fairly sharp way. Obviously, take all this with a grain of salt. Nobody knows for sure exactly how this is going to play out, but we are starting to see some level of convergence among the various forecasters that are out there. And I for one, am certainly hopeful that this is going to be a much shorter event than the Great Recession. And nevertheless, I do think we are looking at well beyond the end of this calendar year to be able to get back to full strength. Certainly, I think at least well into 2021. But I think with a very good chance that we recover most of the ground that we lost fairly quickly. Finally, we've started to think about where we go from here. What are some new growth opportunities that are out there, that would potentially help us to close the gap, that remains. So there are four kind of big areas that we've been putting some energy on. One is capturing manufacturing, reshoring, and new supply chain opportunities. Many of you have already been getting a lot of elevated inquiries from a supply chain perspective. We'd sure love to have a few more buildings right now than we have. But in general, we do think there's a whole range of manufacturing around the world that is going to want to shift back to be closer to where customers are. Don't think of this as like a massive shift necessarily, but we do think there'll be a significant number of new manufacturing projects, more than we would likely normally see. There's a whole range of things that we need to do to get ready for that. Top on the list is investment in site preparedness, as well as our custom workforce solutions and marketing efforts. Second one is accelerating digital Virginia. One of the things that's been clear during the pandemic is that in general, the tech sector has been very resilient, and the types of sectors that are really supporting remote work are largely those that disproportionately benefit the Commonwealth of Virginia. Think about cloud computing, especially. We just had, and Kathy Riley, I think, mentioned the 1,500 job Microsoft Cloud Computing Engineering and R&D Center that just announced in Fairfax, huge win up there. But really we're seeing lots of activity in the cloud computing space, data centers, cloud computing engineering, and so forth, software development, cybersecurity. We think the tech sector in general has tremendous upside. And so the investments the Commonwealth is making in the Tech Town Investment Program are going to go a long way toward helping us to fulfill those possibilities. And again, as a reminder, we're focused not just on the big metros, but identifying and going after rural and small metro opportunities as well. This is also a place where additional broadband investment will be very important. I did want to point out that while most of the new spending items in the state budget are on hold appropriately because of the revenue uncertainty and the anticipation of some short-term downside in the budget, the governor and the General Assembly did fully fund the Tech Town Investment Program. So everything that's in there for universities across the Commonwealth and for the Virginia Community College System, all that is fully funded with no change, including the new FY21 dollars and capital dollars, both general fund and capital. Third opportunity is new telework opportunities. I'd still say we need to be very tentative in how big we think this will be, but certainly telework was already one of the fastest growing segments of employment in the United States and in Virginia. We don't know how big the shift is going to be, but certainly at a bare minimum, we're going to see it grow. We're going to see it accelerate. That's going to be a really particularly big opportunity for the Commonwealth because of the great quality of life that we have, the weather, the great public schools, all the advantages we talk about Virginia being a beautiful, just great place to live. This is a place that we can really, really leverage. We're going to need to do the marketing efforts and so forth to go after that. One big opportunity we have here, we have not talked about a lot previously, but we really got, I guess, partially deliberate, partially lucky. But last year, a year ago, we got through legislation that gives us the option for all VEDP, actually for all incentives, all economic development incentives in Virginia, the agencies that manage those, whether VEDP or DHCD or others, have the ability now to count remote work. So as long as the employees are located in Virginia, they don't all have to be located at a single site. So that's going to be a new opportunity. We'll have to think through how we deal with that. We're going to be marketing that a little bit in the coming weeks. We're also updating our website to make it more clear that that's available. And then finally, retooling and reskilling Virginia's unemployed workforce for those new opportunities. And we're still doing work on the analysis. Reasonably large, the majority of that extended unemployment hospitality. So folks like the low wage women of color that are going to be I think looking for opportunities and getting into new job opportunities that will be there will be critical. There, we're thinking about things like the governor's G3 initiative that we're very enthusiastic about. Of course, the continued expansion of the Virginia Talent Accelerator Program, restoration of VEGIP funding, and potentially some other investments in sub-baccalaureate fields. Lastly, as you look at this page, we are in the process of applying for financial support from USEDA, with the new bucket of funding that was provided to help us engage in third-party support to really go deep in each of these areas and thinking through the segments with the greatest potential, the companies with the greatest potential to grow, and the things that Virginia can do to position itself to be successful. We're going to be looking for potentially USEDA to fund all of that. Hopefully a combination of USEDA and Go Virginia dollars if we're able to make both of those work together. So we're going to be likely applying for that EDA grant this week, hoping for a tentative decision later this month that, whether we get it or not, we're going to go forward and work on these things, but we think it'd be helpful to have some additional third-party assistance. So, Mr. President, those are the main things that I wanted to share. Happy to respond to any comments or questions, suggestions you all may have for me, as usual. And again, thank you all for everything you're doing for economic development in the Commonwealth.
Thank you so much. Appreciate your time today. Curious, and we do have a couple questions popping up, but I want to take presidential priority here and ask you one. There are a few states out there that actually offer incentives for teleworkers to relocate to your state, both on the thought of them being there, and they may have a partner that could be part of the workforce in an area. Is that something we may look at in the future?
Jim, I love that idea. Particularly if you think about telework being something that's probably going to be with us for a long time, and certainly will be bigger than it has been. How much bigger, we don't know, but much bigger. I think it makes a lot of sense to pursue, and it is something we'd love to work on with VEDA to maybe think about what the Commonwealth could do. It's also something, obviously, I think that you were referring to, that a number of localities and foundations across the country have implemented some programs like that with some success. I think the big advantage we have over almost every other state is if you telework in Virginia, you get to live in the great Commonwealth of Virginia, which is, I think, a really special place. Obviously, great quality of life, and with only a few exceptions, a very affordable place to live as well.
Right, and just to follow on, Mark McCaskill wrote on number 3 telework, the market in many regions, Western Virginia, also offer amazing deals on houses and real estate. How do we market and communicate that to higher cost real estate markets in the country?
Absolutely. It's a great question. One of the things we've been trying to get funding for, obviously in recent years, is marketing dollars. So this is actually one area that we'd really love to put some energy. We have a small amount of dollars that are available, and we're exploring right now if basically what we're trying to weigh is how do we want to balance for, and again, it's not a lot of money, but for FY21, is there a case to say, take some of the dollars that we were originally going to program against, to focus on companies, to potentially go more toward, individuals that might be looking to locate for type opportunities. One of those, where we send those, because, the ideal scenario there, you're selling particular locations, communities, and obviously our website's not necessarily set up the best way to drill down to that level, at least not today. So we definitely would welcome any suggestions from Mark or others on the line in that respect. I think Brian asks, how would a locality match work in a teleworking incentive agreement? We haven't yet done one of these, but we're going to work through it together. But I would anticipate that we would have a primary location, for each. Again, the way the code's set up today, it's not a by right, it's a discretionary thing. But in general, we would anticipate that you'd have kind of a primary location, and that we would use that as the determination in terms of the thresholds and so forth. But if others have suggestions, we definitely welcome that. Let's see. Betty Mitchell says, did I understand that a marketing plan related to telework is something VEDP will be putting together? I'd say it's a distinct possibility. I want to manage expectations a little bit right now because there's a whole bunch of initiatives related to recovery that we're working on, but that is something we're taking a look at. And certainly if we do go forward with that, we'll share it on a future ImpactED call. Beth Sim says, who would be the VEDP contact for telework project? So to be clear, we're actually getting ready to update the website. I think it'll be updated this week. If not this week, certainly next week. The telework incentives actually, or the telework provision rather, is eligible for all state administered economic development incentives in Virginia. And again, the way it's structured right now is it's focused more on the company, not so much on the individuals, although it obviously counts the individual job. So this is something we're working through, but you'll see that up on the site soon. Let's see, Matt says, has VEDP been able to provide input into Virginia's K-12 reopening plans? This has the potential to have a substantial impact on the workforce. Yeah, first of all, Matt, strongly agree. Not just K-12, but I think also childcare is a huge issue that's out there. I'm actually co-chairing a back to work task force with the Virginia Early Childhood Foundation, focused on childcare, along with a couple other colleagues. And we're looking at the childcare piece. VEDP is not directly advised, is not actively advising the K-12 folks, but I do think there's a broad awareness that both K-12 reopening and availability of childcare are critical to be able to get our workforce back to work. One of the things that the Virginia Early Childhood Foundation and Kathy Glazer are putting together, I think to come out this week, is going to be a survey that will go to businesses across the Commonwealth to better understand what's going on with childcare and childcare constraints in terms of reopening. So we probably will be asking VEDA to help us to distribute that, as well as all of you, to make sure we get a broad participation in that. Let's see. Liz Povar says, is there any data, particularly visualized data, that shows the current number of individuals teleworking in Virginia and where co-work centers are located? telework equals good opportunity for collaborative messaging with Virginia tourism. I love all those points, Liz. We've not done that work. I did see, I forget what it's called, Stat VA. I'm forgetting what the website name is, but I'll tell you what, I'm going to take that as a takeaway, Jim. And at a bare minimum, we'll find out what other folks have done, and we might do some of this analysis on our own. Just a second to make this note so I don't forget. Okay. Lori says the incentives update is on the site now. So if you were to go to, you see the link there in the chat, vdp.org, incentives. I think we've got it as a tab, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, if you look at the, if you go to vdp.org and then click on incentives, or just go to vdp.org/incentives, scroll down just a little bit, you'll see the navigation that goes discretionary. Actually, I don't know if I can share my screen, but discretionary incentives, etc. Most of you are familiar with this page. We've added all the way on the right telework incentives. And it's pretty simple, but it's just a section that says we now have the ability to provide that flexibility on a case-by-case basis. We've also worked that into the language in the various incentive programs. I did also want to mention that because we didn't want to speak for the other state agencies, we don't talk about it with respect to, say, DHCD or other entities, but technically the same legislation, I believe, does apply to all state-administered incentives in Virginia, not just those administered by VEDP.
Okay.
Let's see, Angela Freeman says, based on needs of families, changes in aging in place, I recommend we consider family care services when discussing child care wraparound services. Great suggestion, Angela, thank you. I'm just kind of keeping track here. I don't want to forget. Okay. Claire Kahn says, how will college university students be included in the teleworking initiative? I don't know if you could expand potentially on that question. I'm not quite sure I understand the question. Jim or Connie, is it obvious to you what she's getting at?
Not sure.
I guess part of it would depend on the particular, or maybe it's more around the notion of attracting people to Virginia. That's a possibility. But at any rate, I do think that the whole telework space, I think, is an area that we've not historically put a lot of energy into, but it's really worth some additional attention. One of the things that, one of the reasons that we put our strategic plan update on hold was that a couple months ago, is we realized, you know what, the landscape is changing. We need to make sure that as we put this together that we're not changing everything, but there are some new opportunities. We want to incorporate those, and telework, I think, is one that we want to really give some attention to. Let's see. John Provost says, USEDA Gov Ideas sounds like an interesting strategic use of the EDA funds. How are you collaborating with DHCD, or how do you envision collaborating with the GOVR regions? It depends a little bit on whether Go Virginia is a co-funder with the effort, but we are we're envisioning doing something kind of like what we did in 2017 when we did the economic growth strategy for Virginia, where we had a steering committee made up of the all the regional EDO executives, CEOs, if you will. So that's what we're envisioning right now. We're absolutely happy to coordinate as well with the Go Virginia regional councils in some way. So John, if you or others have suggestions about how we might best do that, we're definitely open to it. We're just viewing, if you kind of think of those things that I put up on the screen, at least the first three were largely oriented around, recruiting new investment to Virginia. So we were kind of envisioning the regional EDOs as our primary partner for that, but would be thrilled to expand that to some way of more formally engaging Go Virginia or Go Virginia regions. Let's see, Claire's expanded, getting the attention of college university students who can work during higher education studies as well as post-education is a huge workforce pull for Virginia. Interested, there's a plan in working with Virginia's colleges and universities to promote telework opportunities to students and employers. That, Claire, it's a great question. There certainly is not a plan right now, but I love the idea, and we will follow up on that.
Don't see any more questions, Stephen. This is unprecedented access to the head of our state economic development agency. Take advantage of this.
And
Yes,
I
hi,
will
Morgan.
yeah, go ahead.
Good.
I will stay on for a bit. So if anybody has any
Great.
questions you want to
Terrific.
pose in the chat, I'll try to track it.
Stephen, thank you. And thank you for your assistance and participation. It's
Hey.
terrific.
You're welcome.
That's great. Yeah.
Okay. Connie, has Matthew James appeared?
Matthew, are you there?
I could have
Hear
done
me?
that.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
We can.
Hey, I'm like a person surrounded by technology that they don't understand. I'm in my office, but I can't get in.
Well, Matthew, you have the floor to talk about the diversity study.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to talk about a couple of things. One is the diversity study. Connie, as you all may know, we are conducting another diversity study to figure out how we can help small minority, women-owned businesses, veteran businesses to get more business, especially in dealing with the state. So we've had all the state agencies. This was a project that was funded out of the last general session. Coincidentally, it was one of the bills that I introduced, but unfortunately, we couldn't get the funding. So strange things happened. When I joined the administration, we could find the funding. So the concept is, the wide umbrella is we're doing the data collection now. We have contacted all of the major agencies within the state, and we're partnering with the Tracy with the small business diversity. But I wanted to give the economic development community a heads up if they haven't already. We're going to have 2 webinars. One is on June 16th, and Connie has all this information. She'll email out to you guys. The next one is on June 18th, and that webinar has 3 purposes with the consultant that we've hired out of Colorado who did the diversity study for Virginia Beach. They're going to learn more about the study. They'll be able to ask questions about the study, and they'll be able to share testimony. So feel free to share this with any of your businesses that may not be aware of this. Also, within the parameters of the study, we will have one-on-one interviews. We've hired, the consultant has hired 3 consultants, one in Hampton Roads, one in Central Virginia, and one in Northern Virginia, who will be coordinating some of those one-on-one contacts. I've encouraged them to talk to their local economic developers, and that will be a one-on-one. There's a slide that I'll send to Connie that you can contact whichever region you're in to do that. And if you have any questions, give me a call. The last thing I want to, that's tangentially related, is I've been asked to chair a subcommittee on what we call the equity approach, that we want to make sure that you may remember that the governor is creating a new fund using the dark machines in some of the 7-Elevens and convenience stores to have a fund that we can help small businesses. They've asked me to chair the subcommittee on how do we help small businesses get back on their feet and do some retraining. So my concept is, one, we had our first meeting last week, and I wanted to invite some of the economic development folks who are interested. I certainly can coordinate through Connie, but I want to make sure that you guys are involved, because I want to make sure that we help those small businesses in terms of hearing what they need to do. And I realize that in closing, I realize that there's a lot of noise out there in terms of everybody doing surveys, all this stuff. And I wanted you guys to say that if you can keep your ears to the grindstone and let me know if we're confusing people, what we can do to help, that would be greatly appreciated. So I appreciate the time for the brief commercial. Thank you.
Matthew, thank you. Does anyone have any questions? See, Matthew, from Angela Freeman. If possible, when designing the procurement for this, please consider adding language that allow localities or others to create piggyback engagements for a deeper dive of an individual area.
I think that one was for Stephen.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
And Matt has responded to that as well. Maybe we'll leave that for Matt.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, unless there are any questions, just to give you the end game that we want to do on this study, as well as with the committee the committee I'm chairing, is we want to be in a position to introduce legislation in the upcoming session. The study will be done by November, December of this year. And so what the intent is, we want to be able to come up with some resolutions. For example, the one that I know I heard from a lot of small businesses when I was in the General Assembly, as well as in economic development, is we don't have a good definition of small businesses. We don't have a really good support program for small businesses. That's not meant to be judgmental. We just don't have that. So I want to make sure that the economic development folks get their input in, so that whatever we decide to vote on in the upcoming session will add value to the business community. Thanks.
I just sent the link to the SBSD's website with this information to everybody. So
Great. Thanks, Connie.
Great.
Thanks, Jim.
Thank you, Matt. Appreciate it. And Stephen did respond to Angela's question. So our last speaker today is Matt Weaver with Housing and Community Development. And Matt, thank you for being here today. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks so much for allowing me to kind of give you a quick update just with our CDBG Small Business Recovery Assistance. And as you know, Barry, Stephen, and Matthew James just kind of said, there's a lot going on. And a lot of the kind of recovery efforts, we've had a chance to evaluate or kind of look at what's happened over the last couple of weeks from most of the state. A few areas are kind of getting involved in phase one. But as we move into phase two and hopefully continue our progress, we wanted to kind of align the CDBG resources toward some of those small business efforts. And so just a quick recap of what we're trying to do is offer up to $15,000 of a direct service or funding to the businesses. $10,000 of that can be for rent relief or mortgage relief for the business, and then $5,000 for what we're calling reopening activities. So basically, if a business needs to buy equipment like the plexiglass barriers, technological equipment, so they can do a virtual transaction or a transaction over a distance, trying to provide an opportunity for those businesses to open back up safely, meet the requirements of the state, but also hopefully bring people back on board or expand their business even during these times. So it's $500,000 that has to go to the locality and then is passed on through to the business. That's a CDBG regulation that it has to go to a unit of local government, which most of you are familiar with, whether entitlement or a non-entitlement, which the state kind of works with primarily. To Matthew James's point just a minute ago, we want to also prioritize some of these small women-owned and minority-owned businesses. And so we've tried to create a small incentive of an additional $300,000 for a locality that targets these small businesses. They don't have to be SWAM certified. We're calling them quote unquote SWAM eligible. If you have sole proprietors, if you have women or minority-owned businesses, the barbershop's a great example of one that would never really need to be SWAM certified, but there would meet all the criteria of a SWAM eligible business. So if we can target some of those small businesses, we can give an additional kind of $300,000 to that locality. We're also trying to make our state CDBG resources as flexible as possible so that we can hopefully align with some of the entitlement funding that's out there, whether through the CDBG resources a locality gets or through some of the CARES Act funding that's come through localities. A lot of the localities received a lot of funding specifically for the population you serve that has to be COVID-19 related. If you're already undertaking small business activities and you're finding that you're not able to serve all your businesses, we can try to bolster the activities you're doing with our state funds, or we can maybe fill in some of the holes so that we can target some that we're deeming eligible and you can fill in larger businesses or another targeted avenues. I want to give a shout out to Jim in York County and really the Lower Peninsula They're going to be one of our first grantees, but they're looking at it a little more regionally. They're not doing it with just York County. They're taking on the city of Williamsburg and the city of Poquoson to try to meet really the business's needs. They're doing a program that really just looks at buying equipment for the businesses. So hopefully they can serve over 200 businesses with some of the funding they get from DHCD. And there's been other examples in Culpeper County. We're seeing some down in the far southwest too. So it's really businesses have struggled through the closure, regardless of whether they've been impacted with a large number of COVID-19 cases or not. Business closure for a length of time is always challenging. So if we can use the CDBG resources to help you engage those small businesses to reopen safely and kind of keep the recovery progression going, we're happy to kind of start that conversation and do so. We're not limiting this to just this is the recovery efforts. We also do have some retooling or manufacturing funding available if you have some businesses that are looking to try to create PPE or products for COVID-19 response. We also have some funding available for isolation facilities or temporary housing facilities. Some of the agricultural businesses that have been hit have been looking at how do you house some of the workers temporarily so that they're not affecting their families when they go home, or they're able to still work or make an income. So happy to kind of think strategically with you all as we continue this kind of progression into phase 2 and hopefully and beyond. So that's just a real quick recap of the small business recovery assistance through the CDBG program. We'll be hopefully rolling out a statewide effort that will include a little bit more of this. We got some additional funding through the CARES Act that we as a state are looking at the biggest priorities of how that $20 million is spent, but we're hopeful some of that will go toward business assistance also. So stay tuned for a little bit more announcements on that in the future. But happy to be here for any questions you have for our this kind of current tranche of CDBG funds.
Matt, thank you. Great timely information. Much appreciated. Greg Hitchens did ask, can entitlement communities, can they use their funds for these same activities within the LMI areas?
So yes, it's up to the locality how they spend their CDBG funds. And so entitlement communities can do small business assistance. They may have to update their action plan or undertake some activities that HUB will allow. But typically what we've seen with a lot of these funds, and I might get some of your CDBG programmatic folks, they may not like me for saying this, but you can be pretty flexible with a lot of these COVID-19 funds. But it is up to the locality to how you address the needs of what your locality has been impacted with COVID-19. So we're able to be a little more flexible across the state since we're not directly affecting one locality. But yes, and generally you could, as an entitlement community, do this.
Okay. From Jenna French, can funds be reimbursed to businesses who have already invested in reopening activities as we now enter into phase 2?
The short answer is yes. What we had done as a state is go back to the declaration of emergency on March 12th. The harder part is going to be kind of as a locality or a larger kind of entity developing a program that represents all of your businesses and then making sure that that business purchase fits into that criteria. So most likely if they did buy masks, plexiglass, tables and chairs to allow outdoor seating, et cetera, they would be eligible for reimbursement up to $5,000. But that would we would have to have that conversation with the locality partner to make sure we phrase it right or capture it so that you can go back and capture that phase 1 expenditures.
Okay. Nothing's coming in.
Yeah, and this is we're luckily not going anywhere, and so we'll be happy to kind of assist you as we keep rolling out the recovery efforts. And I've really been learning a lot from localities as they've been rolling out some of their the local COVID assistance funds they've had, and some of the ideas they have been really fun for us to think about as a state of how we could use that and roll that out. So if you have great ideas that you're experiencing locally, happy to hear that and see if we could partner as well as just take it in.
Okay, we do have another question from Angela Freeman. Do you have any recommendations of how entitlement communities can access these funds if we could not repurpose our existing allocation? Or will the next round of DHCD business assistance be better for us to look toward?
Go ahead and reach out. And so let's go ahead and start having those conversations to see what we can do. Right now, the current money that's on the screen now is really for non-entitlements, but I think we're trying to catalog those entitlement communities or communities that have already kind of engaged in some of these activities, what the needs are. And so that way we know for this third allocation of CV funds, how we can spend that. And we can then make that statewide priority to go into some of the entitlement areas and bolster the efforts. There may also be some ways to kind of take some of the resources that have been expended and partner that or look at ways of being flexible. So if you can, reach out and we'll try to see what we can do.
Great. Okay. Not seeing anything else. Connie, any other updates?
No, I don't think so. As Jim said, we'll meet again next Monday, the 15th. And Stephanie Agee from VEDP will be talking about international trade and hope to have another speaker on tourism, but that's not confirmed yet. I hope to have that confirmed tomorrow.
Okay. And Matt, you're always welcome back. If there's other things you'd like to update us on, you're welcome to join us.
No worries.
Appreciate what you're doing. Is Stephen still on? Did you have anything you wanted to finish with?
No, Mr. President, I think we covered everything.
I can't get over how much I love hearing that. Okay. Well, thank all of our speakers today. Greatly appreciate the information. I think it is helpful. We had a good crowd. 150 some dropped down to 130 some. That's not bad at all. And we will be back, as we noted, on the 15th. So hang in there. Things are getting better, and appreciate what everyone's doing out there. Thank you for being with us today. Take care.
Again.
Hi, everybody. Thank you.